Deputy Representative Beerepoot and all the other dignitaries. I'm proud to be here and that we have the opportunity to sign this extension of a very important MOU in a digital way. I think it shows both our flexibilities and adaptation to new digital opportunities. Although I would love to see us in a physical form together in Taiwan, or maybe receiving your delegation here in the Netherlands, this is at this moment a very good way to do it in a digital way. And I think the MOU and our excellent cooperation in the field of energy and innovation hopefully helps us also in our common fight against climate change and brings new innovation in the field of energy. And I think it's good to see a well-functioning working plan and a lot of active persons and activities among both our parties. And I think that will bring us new best practices, new ways how to learn from each other in a reciprocal way. And I think this moment is very important. Also good to have the in-depth discussion you will have in the forums and the webinars to follow. So again, thank you very much, and looking forward to our further continuation of this fruitful cooperation. And I wish you a very pleasant and good webinar, and hopefully we will meet in person somewhere in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tjerk. Thank you very much, Mr. Chen. I want to congratulate both of you with the continuation of this MOU. I really hope it will be as successful as it is right now. So from my side, a thumbs up, and maybe also from the rest of us. I wish you good luck with this MOU. Can you please show the MOU once again? Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Thank you, Mr. Tjerk.
Thank you all of you.
Now we start with the ecology presentations. I have informed you in the opening that these presentations from the Dutch side have been pre-recorded. We have done this because the instability of the internet can sometimes cause problems. But it's also very convenient because now we know exactly from each Dutch presenter how long his presentation, the duration of his presentation. So we hope we don't run out of time. Of course, all the presenters are here in the meeting to address your questions. And please, I want to say that again, please use the chat function for your questions, and preferably in English, because that will be the main language during this webinar. Then I would like to announce the first speaker now, Mr. Bram du Saar. He is Program Manager Offshore Wind at Rijkswaterstaat. And in his presentation, Mr. Bram du Saar will inform you on the ecological framework that the Dutch government uses for offshore wind deployment in the North Sea in the Netherlands. So we may start the video.
Hello, esteemed colleagues. My name is Bram du Saar, and I'm the project manager offshore wind energy at Rijkswaterstaat. Rijkswaterstaat is the executive agency for the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Today, I would like to talk to you about the ecological framework we use for the deployment of offshore wind on the North Sea in the Netherlands. First, I would like to elaborate a little bit more on the responsibilities Rijkswaterstaat has on the North Sea. We are the designated authority for the North Sea and thereby coordinating manager and also regulate the use of many activities on the North Sea. For example, water quality and also ecology. Next to that, we are also an advisory and executive agency for many departments and ministries which have responsibilities for the North Sea. For example, spatial planning, ecological effects and measures, stakeholder management, and also the realization of information and data management on the North Sea. The program I'm program manager of is situated in this category. Now let's take a look at the outroll of offshore wind in the Netherlands in the past years. The first offshore wind farm was initiated by a call for pilot projects by the Dutch government to explore if it was feasible and sustainable to have an offshore wind farm in the North Sea. Because the North Sea is very sandy, secondly, it's very busy, and thirdly, it's ecologically challenged by a lot of ecosystems which are situated within the North Sea. Because at the time, we didn't know a lot about the possible impacts of offshore wind. The 2 wind farms, which were picked for this project, were obliged to have an ecological monitoring system to monitor the impact on the ecosystem of the North Sea. The second phase of the offshore wind deployment in the Netherlands was characterized by further growth and also by a more liberal and market-oriented approach. The 3 wind farms you see in the map are indicated with the brown color. Also, these wind farms were obliged to have an ecological monitoring system, just like the wind farms in the first round. After the 2 rounds I described earlier, we are now in the building process of round 3. This round is characterized by a big upscaling of offshore wind. Because of the upscaling, the market-oriented approach was replaced by a more governmental strategy and also a more centralized ecological program called WOZEP. Because of the upscaling, we also, for the first time, used a framework for the assessment of the ecology and cumulative effects of offshore wind on the ecosystem. This is called KEC. This third round will result in 3.5 gigawatts of offshore wind installed in the Netherlands in 2023. We are currently in the process of building these offshore wind farms. In the fourth round, the policy ambition is aimed at 7 gigawatts. Due to the knowledge we gained from the earlier ecological programs, we updated the KEC scheme, as I described earlier, to version 3.0. This KEC scheme instigated that the eco-limitation of offshore wind in the North Sea was only 6.1 gigawatts. Thereby, the Dutch government decided to postpone the remaining 900 megawatts for the next round. This fourth round resulted in 3 wind farms, combined 6.1 gigawatts. Speaking of the next round, we are currently in the planning phase for planning the offshore wind farms until 2040, and also exploring the possibilities for an acceleration up till 2030. Because of the ecological boundaries I explained earlier, we now also are in the process to update the KEC scheme even further with new data and new information to look at the possibilities if there is enough bandwidth on the North Sea to implement the offshore wind farms and also to keep a sustainable ecosystem on the North Sea. Lastly, I want to show you the possible future of offshore wind. The European Commission has just published an offshore renewable energy strategy, which instigates 300 gigawatts of offshore wind and 40 gigawatts of blue energy in the international North Sea. For the Netherlands, this translates into 60 to 72 gigawatts of offshore wind in the future of 2050. So you see, the discovery of bandwidth for ecological space to implement offshore wind will be on the table for quite some time. Now that I have explained the implementation of offshore wind at sea, I would like to take a closer look to the ecological checks and balances in the planning process itself. The planning process is characterized by several phases, and in every phase we look at the ecological implementations and ecological impact of offshore wind. In these phases, several ecological assessments take place. At first, the KEC scheme, which I described earlier to you, and in the other stages, every time we do an environmental assessment, more in depth, and thereby looking more and more into the possible effects of offshore wind. In the tender phase, the Dutch government prescribes ecological requirements to the offshore wind exploits. For example, to build with nature or to implement a start-stop procedure when a lot of birds migrate over the North Sea. And finally, we still employ a monitoring scheme for the state and the progress of the ecosystem in the North Sea. In the last part of my presentation, I would like to have a look at the risks and opportunities an offshore wind farm can pose on its surrounding ecosystem. As you see in this slide, the balance between the opportunities and risk is a very slim one. On the one side, an offshore wind farm can increase the number of habitats, can also lead to more diversity, and can be an incubator for new species. On the other hand, it can decrease the habitats, the number of habitats, and also lead to less water quality and introduce invasive species. Therefore, it's very important to have a tailor-made and precise policy to make the opportunities bigger and to reduce the risks. Therefore, we apply specific policies to enhance the opportunities and limit the risks. For example, to stimulate multi-use within the offshore wind farm and to limit the seabed disturbance, and also implement policies like building with nature and nature-inclusive building. On the other hand, we try to limit the ecological impact, for example, for birds, by introducing bird radar, and also for bats by introducing bat radar, and implementing curtailment periods when there is a lot of migration of seabirds over the North Sea. Next to that, we still have to do a lot of research on new issues on the ecosystem effects. For example, hydraulics, stratification, sediment, and also water quality and filtration aspects. I have come to the conclusion of my presentation. I gave you a brief overview of the ecological framework we use for the deployment of offshore wind. My colleagues Maarten de Jong and Kees Vlak will elaborate more on several details of my presentation. I thank you for your attention and are now happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you, Bram. Very interesting presentation. I think it's important to note that Bram mentioned that in the third round there was a scaling up of offshore wind farms in the Netherlands. And Bram informed us that a market-oriented approach was replaced by a more governmental strategy on offshore wind, with the aim to de-risk the application process for the developers. In short, this mentioned, and that's very important that I would like to stress, is that from that moment onwards, the Dutch government became responsible for all the studies, like for instance, the environmental impact assessments. So the developers were not anymore in charge for this. Okay, now we have the next speaker, Mr. Chung Hsien, Director of Energy Technology of the Taiwan Bureau of Energy. Mr. Chen will give his presentation live, and in his presentation, he will touch upon the strategies for environmental protection in Taiwan. Mr. Chen, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Moderator. I think I'm Chung Hsien from the Bureau of Energies of Taiwan. I'm the Director of the Energy Technology Divisions. My job is focused on promote new and renewable energy in Taiwan. So I want to talk about offshore wind energy policy in Taiwan. And my presentation will be separate into the 4 parts. First will be some policy for the offshore energies. The second part will be about rural development. I think it's just some draft information for all of you. The third one is about ecology, the strategy for the ecology protection or the environmental issues. And finally, I have some outlook for the year of 2035. Next, please. Next slide. For the Taiwan market, I think our policy was, just follow the UK experience. Our policy we separate into the 3 phases. First phase will be we so-called a demo. We don't have such experience, so in the year of 2011, we'll start our demo program, and the result will be, I think, the Formosa 1 in the North Taipei, North Taiwan will be commissioned in year of the 2020, year of the 2019. The third one, we so-called the demo wind farm, will be commissioned this year in July. I think the Taipei one is in the central of the Taiwan. So I think we have the good result for the demonstration program. The second phase, I think we so-called loans for the potentials. I think we set a target about 5.5 giga, and by the selection is about 3.8. The selection means that they use the feed-in tariff, they have the high price to support for the wind farm. The second capacity will be the by auction. Auction is about 1.7. The auction price is low compared to the feed-in tariff. And in Taiwan, we will finish about 5.5 giga in year of 2025. I think we will start in to plan the some so-called rural development, the policy for the Zone 3. Zone 3 means that for year of the 2026 to year of the 2035. Just mentioned that we announced about 1.5 giga per year to from the year of the 2026 to year of the 2035, means that the total will be about 15 giga for the 10 years. We was use the so-called stage selection. One is the capability review, the second is the bidding process. By the way, we also have some industrial relevance plan will be included in the so-called rural development. Next, please. And I think we talk about a demo incentive program for the Formosa 1. Formosa 1, I think the total will be about 128 mega. The total will be separated into the 2 stages. One is the 4 mega for the 2 turbines, and the other will be the 20 turbine for the 6 turbines. They will be commissioned in the end of the year, in the end of the 2019. I think it just mentioned for the left picture. I think it's in the North Taiwan. So I think that it is also the good wind farm for the North Taiwan. Next. Next. I think for the second stage, we so called the previous, yeah. I think for the second, the phase 2 about the loaner application for planning. The total will be the 5.5 giga. I think we just mentioned that by installation and also the by auction. Installation will be commissioned before the year of 2025. The auction will be commissioned. The commission year will be the year of 2025. So I think that before the year of 2024, all the installation wind farm will be commissioned before the year of 2025. I think that almost will be in the center of the Taiwan, and also the auction will be commissioned in year of 2025, and they will be in the. I think the most will be in the center of the Taiwan. So I think this about the second phase 2, we so-called the loaner for the application. And the next one, I think that I want to talk about the so-called loaner development, the main scheme. I think that we have the 4 scheme for our next phase. First will be we will enlarge our capacity. I think in the past time we will announce about 1 giga per year. The total will be the 10 giga. But I think our new version, new draft will be enlarge our capacity to from the 1. Giga to the 1.5 giga per year. Means that the total will be the 15 gigawatt in the 10 years. And also we have the so-called 2-stage selection process. Stage 1 will be the capability review. The second stage will be the bidding process. I think that later I have the more detailed information for you. And also for the so-called flexible industrial relevance project options. I think in the second phase, 100% of the quantity will be follow the so-called IRP procedures. I think for the loaner, the second phase, we will have some so-called flexibility about the item, about the quantities. We also have some flexibilities and also have some option cooperation for the future items. Also, I think the final one will be we also enhance our capabilities. The one wind farm will be about 500 mega, and we want to more people, more developers can join our games, can join our Taiwan's offshore energy market, so they can have the good diversities. Next one. And for this slide, we show now the more detailed information for the for the 15 giga. We separate into the 2 stage. First stage will be the 9 giga from the year of the 2026 to year 31 to year of 2031. This is so-called first stage. The second stage will be from the year of 32 to year of 35. Based on the first stage, we will be invited into the 3 rounds. First round will be, I think, about 2 years, and the total capacity will be about 3 giga. We will be announced in year of the next year, year of 2022. The second round will be about also the 3 giga. We will be announced in the year of the 2023. And finally, round for the round 3 will be announced in year of the 2024. So means now in the next 3 years, we have the 3 giga per year to announce in different commission years. Okay, next one. I want to talk about the more detailed selection process for the long threads. I think we will just mention that we are separate into the 2-stage selection process. One is we will concern about we so-called technology capabilities, and the other one is about financial capabilities. I think we have some idea about the average score will be achieved. I think the minimum score will be about 70s, and also have some we so-called IRP, the industrial level relevance plans. I think just mentioned the quality is about. I think we not we not request all the developers to reach about 100. I think only 6% of the quantity will be okay. And we also have the option item. Option item will be about some, I think some technology. We can have the cooperation between our local supply chain and the development. There will be the 10 points. And finally will be the we so-called bidding process. The price I think all the developers they have the bidding price. The law will be got the right to develop the wind farm. And also the final will be about the grid connection capacity for the some areas. I think it's about our own selection process. One is the so-called capability review, including the technology and financial capability review. The second is about IRP review. And the second stage will be about the bidding process. Next, I think I want to talk about the so-called strategy for the environmental protection or some ecology protection, especially for the I think for the long solution issues. I think that for the selection we must have some principle. First will be about some I think some regulation or some legal that will be some the area that they have some issues. So like the protection area, the restraint areas. I think that the area will be not including to our side for the offshore energies. The second is about I think some area they have some planning or they have some developing project like the original wind farm. So I think by the slide we also exclude some area that the regulation that they are prohibit. And for these issues about the SEA information, I think we have some rural development. We have some white dolphin and birds and fishing issues. Also, we also concern about also called decommission issues and the cripple routine plan. I think we have detailed information about this issue. And next one. For the some EIA process, I just mentioned that BOE have the so-called SEA process, and all developers they have more detailed information. They must follow the EIA procedure. They got some consent from the EPA locals. So the developer must should exclude some also called consultation and social baseline study and more detailed information about the ecology and the environmental issues. And I think the BO will be supervised. All the development must follow the conclusion and commit from the EIA. So I think some about the total information, a total solution for the offshore energies. Next slide. I think that for the wind farm, especially for the environmental protection issue and also the ecology issue, I think we want to have the also called the total the three-way wind solution based on the energy, ecology, and even for some fisheries. So based on the also called plan station. I think for the EIS stage, where I think the BOE will have the SEA and also encourage all the developers they want must have the consultation with different stakeholder. In the second stage, also called the construction stage, I think that all the environmental monitor must be promised for some conclusion for the EIA, like the mitigation measures. So some key issues. Also, the BOE will be supervise all the issues, and our EPA will also in charge all the issues. And finally will be the operation. Operation means now they must coexistence for different stakeholder like the fishery man like the some issue want to have the so-called sustainable issues for the wind farm. I think finally we have also the decommission all the development must decrease all the turbine or the jacket from the sea. I think next. I think I finally have an outlook for the year of the 2035. I think the government want to support for the green energy demand. I think our local supply, local enterprise need more green energies, and also the sustainability for the local industrial supply chain development. By the way, we also think that want to have a multi-way situation, including the social, environmental, energy, and also ecologies. And we also want to have the force consensus for the policies. I think it's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your very interesting presentation. What we can learn from your presentation is that Taiwan has a very ambitious target for the future and a long-lasting, stable government policy. I think that we now come to the Q&A of this session. So I would like to invite Bram and Mr. Chen to join the meeting for the Q&A. And the first question will be from Kees Mokveld.
Yes, thank you, Arjen. This is a question for Bram. Bram, you spoke about multi-use of the North Sea. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? How do you see the future for multi-use?
Dear esteemed colleagues, nice to meet you in this session. Multi-use is something, it's in a new stage. My colleague Kees Vlak will elaborate more on multi-use, but there's certainly a lot of potential interest in multi-use, especially with regard to seaweed, mussels, and oyster growing, for example. And a lot of Dutch and international initiatives are currently inquiring with several Dutch agencies, like, for example, Rijkswaterstaat, which is my employer, or the Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, to explore the potential opportunities within wind farms. But it's still early days to tell if the potential interest will eventually lead to applications, because also wind farms are experiencing operational limitations, for example, by surveying their wind farm in general with the combination of multi-use, which also needs space within the wind farm. So as our moderator said, that there's a balance between wind and ecology. There's also a balance between multi-use and the use for the wind farm.
Thank you, Bram. And maybe I have a question to Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, in your policy of the Taiwanese government, it seems to be very much focused on mitigating the risks for ecology. But can you say something, a few words about ecology enhancement? And maybe is there also room in your policy for multi-use of the offshore wind farms?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think that for the mitigation of risk is important for the Taiwan's the government. I think for from the slide for the SEA stage, we will collect all the issues like the dolphin issues, like the bird issues, and like the fishing issues, and also we will concern about think how to have the coexistence with all the issues. So for the SEA issues, we have some measures. We want to mitigate all the risk. So like the dolphin, I think we have some noise. Or if they want to drain the jacket, they have some noise level. Or the development they must follow the rule. By the way, I think SEA is a general case. For the specific case, like all the develop in the EIA procedures, if the area that they have some special species, they also must have some the other issues. So follow the rule, we use the SEA and also the EIA for the SEA is for the general case, the EIA is for the special case. Want to mitigate all the risk because we think that we want to have a multi-win situation, especially for the green energy, for the environmental, even for the ecologies. I think this is for the first question. The second issue is about the multi-use for the sea. I think in Taiwan, I think for the we so-called longer development procedure, even for the second stage, we collect all the information from the other government agents. If they have some if they have some regulation, like the AD, they have some specific purpose, we'll follow the rule. But I think that we have some we so-called multi-use means that by the way, we want to have the more detailed information about our sea. Maybe not only for the sea level, but also for the below the sea levels. We want to have the more big pictures. So the Taiwan government want to have more detailed information. I think we have the so-called National Ocean Council. They will do all the detailed information about how to use for the sea. I think it's my comment.
Very much. Next question maybe from you, Kees?
Yes, I have another question for Bram again. This is about the shutdown on demand mechanism. There's a question. Do you know if there is in the Netherlands already formulated and executed a shutdown on demand regulation? And maybe you can also explain something about how it's done elsewhere in the world.
Thank you for the question. Yes, there is a shutdown on demand system formulated in the Netherlands, as well as onshore as offshore. There are several shutdown on demand systems, or as we call it, start-stop sequence models, available from the shelf. You can buy them commercially. For example, smaller wind farms have start-stop sequences, which are real-time. So when the radar detects a bird, the wind farm will be shut down, or a curtailment period will be instigated immediately. But for the bigger offshore wind farms, this would give risks for the grid stability. Therefore, we are now in the process in the Netherlands to formulate a prediction model that predicts a curtailment period for 72 to 84 hours in advance. So our national grid operator can take measurements for, or can take measures to curtail the offshore wind farms and to supply to get energy from other suppliers, and therefore by balancing the net. So, and that's the most challenging part. The most challenging part is to formulate a prediction model that predicts this curtailment period 27 hours in advance. We are currently not aware of an operational system internationally which has the same characteristics. Of course, there are curtailment systems and shutdown on demand systems. You can buy them from the shelf, but not with a prediction model included.
Maybe I have a question to Bram and to Mr. Chen. My question is related to all the studies in the Netherlands. All the studies have been performed now by the Dutch government. I'd like to ask Bram, do you think it's good, this shift? Previously, it was the responsibility of the developers to do this study. Now it's the development of, now it's the responsibility of the government. I want to know from you, Bram, if you think this is a wise decision of the government to do this. And secondly, I would like to ask Mr. Chen, do you think that maybe in the future the Taiwanese government might also take the responsibility to execute these studies themselves? The first question to Bram.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a wise decision. In the second round, we were still in a market-orientated approach, and the environmental assessments were done by the wind farm exploitants themselves. It led to a lot of documents contradicting themselves, for example, or each other, because every wind farm operator had done his research from a certain angle or from a certain perspective, which was hard for the Dutch government to combine to look at the cumulative effects of offshore wind. So on the one hand, as you said earlier, it posed less risks for the wind deployment by doing it as the Dutch government themselves. And on the other hand, it gives us a more enhanced and integrated scope of all the effects which are involved with deploying offshore wind.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think for the Taiwan government, I think we will follow to do some study. I think the government want to have the so-called platform. We want to collect all the information from the wind farm, and based on this information, I think we can have the good so-called reliability for the turbine, and we also can collect all the information to know the performance about the different type of the turbine. So by the way, we have I think at this moment we have tried to create some platform to collect all the information. And I encourage all the developers will be put all the information to the platform, and we will try to have some also called a study for all the information based on the Taiwan wind farm. So we can try to have the good solution for the Asia wind farm and try to have some result, especially for the Asia market. This is for response for your issues. The second issue is want to response. I think the other question about the shutdown on the demand. I think in the Taiwan we also have some opinion for they want the government, they want the BOE to maybe follow all the information, because I think you have some measure, but just mention for the response from the speak. They still need some technology about like the prediction, especially the big some group of the birds. So I think the Taiwan will also want to collect all the information, especially for the offshore energy. I think that the committee member from the EIA, they also ask the BOE to collect all the information like the Netherlands. So maybe this issue is also important for the Taiwan. If you have the more wind turbines, but our ecology, our environmental is also have face the same issues. I want to talk about we in Taiwan we also have some issues. Thank you.
Maybe one last question.
Yes, Arjen. This is also a question for Bram. What is expected to be the, from ecology point of view, the biggest bottleneck for the future development of offshore wind?
I think that will be the accumulating effects of offshore wind altogether, also with multi-use. We are currently in the process of looking at the ecosystems level, ecosystems effect level of the large upscaling of offshore wind in the North Sea, and we are not looking anymore at the effects. We are looking at the effects per wind farm, but also in the combination of all wind farms. And this has indicated that a further large-scale increase of offshore wind of the North Sea may have structural ecosystem effects that are currently still not occurring, but are that are possible when we upscale to, for example, 40 or 60 gigawatts in the future. So such changes in the physical functioning of the North Sea may influence the primary production of the North Sea and the foundation of the food web on which the higher tropic levels are based upon. So the cumulative effects are now becoming more and more important for the decision on large upscale wind development in the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. Hereby, we will close the Q&A for this session. So thank you very much, Bram du Saar and Mr. Chen Hsien. And our next speaker is Mr. Kees Vlak, Senior Advisor at Rijkswaterstaat. And the title of his presentation is Multi-Use of the North Sea. In his presentation, Mr. Kees will explain how the offshore wind areas can be used for other activities like food production, other types of renewable energy like floating wind, like floating solar, and adding new types of ecological habitats. We may start the video.
Okay, hello, my name is Kees Vlak. I work for Rijkswaterstaat Netherlands, and I'm here to tell you something about other ways to use wind farms in our North Sea. First, a little bit about Rijkswaterstaat. Rijkswaterstaat is the government agency who is in control of all the national roads and waterways in the Netherlands, but is also the manager of the North Sea area of the Netherlands. So that means we will give out permits for things like wind farms. We control the seaways and all things associated with that. And of course, recently we have been very busy with wind farms. Wind farms are a very important part of energy transition in the Netherlands. And since the Netherlands is a very crowded place, we have been looking at the North Sea for getting being the main area of growth for wind energy, which is resulting in a lot of new large wind farms in the North Sea. Okay. This is the latest example of that, also our biggest wind farm as to today. This is wind farm Borselen on the very southern part of the Dutch North Sea, next to the Belgian border and the Belgian wind farms. We've planted 1,500 megawatts of wind power over there. And we're also thinking about what can we do more with this space. The site is over 300 square kilometers wide, but we still have a lot of room in between the wind turbines to use for other things. So we started the process of what is this area also good for, and we made what we may call an area passport. In this area passport, we're telling what are the national aims for this area, what are the characteristics of the area, what are the possibilities to use this area for, and finally we allocate space for specific users in this area. We do that with an area designation map. On this map, you can see different colors for different users. And light blue is for aquaculture, things like seaweed farming. The dark blue areas for passive fishing. I will go to all these types of uses in the next sheets. And yellow is for floating solar. Green is for development of nature. And gray is for all of the above and for things we have not even thought of yet. The triangles are nature projects which have been made while building the wind farm. The numbers are 3 kilometers for each area. And in total, we have almost 100 square kilometers free for co-use. Well, we are at the start of this type of planning. So we don't know really yet what's going to flourish in the future, what is not going as well. So we've also said in every 5 years, we will look and see what's doing well and what's not doing so well. And we can make other designations if needed. Then I'll tell you something about the different uses. Firstly, experiments with passive fishing. That is fishing with pots and baskets. Not very new for many countries, but in the Netherlands we don't do that because the natural shores in the Netherlands are either sandy or muddy. So they're not very good for things like lobsters and crabs and squids. But in the wind farm, we do, of course, plant lots of solid surfaces. On the solid surfaces, we get high numbers of shellfish, and those in turn will attract lots of squids and lobsters. So we expect these areas to be much better for these types of fishing. We've already made a call for permits, and there is companies who are interested in starting this. So we'll see how well this goes. Then the second type of use, which is definitely going to happen, is seaweed farming. In the adjacent Belgian wind farm, Noorder, there's already a first farmer who is active in that. And he's also interested in starting in Borselen soon. His ambitions are very high. He wants to make over 1,000 square kilometers for seaweed farming. We say, well, let's first see what happens if we do this. We are planning a big monitoring and a project when this goes ahead to find out what are the ecological effects of these types of seaweed farming. What does it mean for the nutrients in the sea? What does it mean for things like fish? So if that all goes well, it might go very big. And if it gives too many problems, it won't go as big. Then another looming prospect on the horizon is floating solar. Not all that usual yet in the sea. I think in water lakes and ponds in the Netherlands over the last few years, we've seen some projects being started in this. In Asia, there have been lots of big projects in this area. But now there are also companies looking to bring this technology to sea. That is, of course, quite a more challenging environment with all the big waves you can have. But they're now already doing experiments on technology. How do you keep the installations in the place and without breaking apart? Those first trials are quite successful. And we're now working towards a first production site in 2023 and then to be built wind farm Hollandse Kust Noord. So that is an interesting development. If that works out in time, we might see sites like this filling in the available space between turbines with solar. And solar and wind, of course, go very well together. If they can use the same cables, you don't have to invest in all that extra infrastructure. So that would be an interesting development. Then another one on energy is harvesting energy from the currents. Classical is the type of tidal current water turbines you see on the right, which is in our Oosterschelde barrier. With those types of water turbines need high speeds, typically from 5 meters per second or so. In the open sea conditions like you have in Borselen, you will not really get anywhere near that. So you maybe have one, perhaps at sometimes even two, but there are now inventors working on things like you see on the picture left and in the middle, which we call an underwater kite, which can harvest the energy of slow-moving waters. First experiment with that installation will be made this year. And if it is successful, it will probably come to Borselen as well. And well, it would be very exciting if we can use that as well beneath the waves. Then finally, but certainly not last, is developing nature. That is definitely also a goal for us. And well, that sometimes means creating extra shelter for large fish like cod. Once again, in our types of coast with lots of sand, there's very little shelter for large fish, so they can use objects like this, tubes and reef domes, to hide in, which will create a much higher chance of survival for young fish, and which in turn is also very interesting for all sorts of other environments. But maybe the best thing to do is also to just leave things alone, because normally in Dutch seafloor, fish trawlers will get around a few times every year, so they will plow through to the seafloor, and just not having that will already restore lots of organisms which are lost have been lost for a long time. So we're very interested to see what happens if we just leave things as they are. Well, that is just what I wanted to tell you now. Like I say, we will be following and evaluating this, and if you have questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kees. Very, very interesting presentation. The next speaker is Mr. Maarten de Jong, an ecologist at Rijkswaterstaat. The title of his presentation is WOZEP, Wind Energy at Sea Ecological Program, Multi-Use of North Sea Wind Farms. In his presentation, Maarten will discuss how the government has set up ecological research under the WOZEP program. From the beginning of offshore wind deployment in the Netherlands already in 2008, offshore wind farm owners had an obligation to monitor and to protect vulnerable species like mammals, birds and bats. You may start the video.
Hello everybody, my name is Maarten de Jong. I'm working at Rijkswaterstaat, the Netherlands. So I'm working for Wind Energy at Sea Ecological Program. So I studied marine ecology. I also studied environmental engineering. My focus during my studies was more marine tropical ecological field work. So a lot with coral reefs, fish, mangroves, seagrasses and sponges. And afterwards, after my study, I've been doing a PhD on the ecological effects of sand extraction in the North Sea. But now I'm working at Rijkswaterstaat, which is the executive agency of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. So I'm involved with WOZEP. And my topics are benthos, fish, electromagnetic fields, and ecosystem effects. And I'm also involved in writing the site decision plots, which are the permits for the offshore wind farms. I also have a role in nature inclusive building, and I'm part of the licensing department, so I also do some small permits sometimes. So WOZEP is financed by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, and it's a coordinated national research program. It's in order to reduce uncertainties in an efficient and cost-effective way. So there are no costs for the offshore wind farm operators. And we tend to move from worst case in the beginning when there were a lot of knowledge gaps. We now shift to more realistic approaches because we gained a lot of more knowledge. So we focus on top priority ecological insights, focus on the vulnerable and protected species, so sea mammals, birds and bats, and also some attention for benthos and also a bit for fish, but the focus is on these really protected species. So the index of my presentation is a short piece on the ecological effects of offshore wind farms. Then I will go into detail on WOZEP, and then I will discuss our framework, ecology and accumulation, and I will close off with mitigation in wind farm site decisions. So something about the ecological effects of offshore wind farms. So because of offshore wind farms, there are direct effects on birds, bats and sea mammals. So In short, these are coalitions of birds and bats above the water. There's also habitat loss or maybe attraction by birds and sea mammals with offshore wind farms. It can also be the case that there will be barrier effects. So for birds, offshore wind farms can be a barrier. And also for migratory fish and sea mammals, the electromagnetic fields of the cables can be a problem or a barrier. There's also disturbance by pile driving. So sea mammals and fish, they are disturbed because of the underwater noise. And there are also indirect effects. So before we focused on the direct effects, but now we shift also to the more indirect effects, which I will discuss later. So WOSEP, Wind Energy at Sea, ecological program, has a lot of topics. So it's about bats and birds. We also have a topic with fish and benthos, the organisms living on the seabed, and of course the marine mammals. So left, we have the bat research. So we have a network with detectors for bats on sea. We also have research with thermal cameras for detecting bats. And we also have a topic with investigating the effectiveness of mitigation measures. And then I shift to the bird coalitions. So we catched some birds and we added some sensors on the birds, so we can trace and track the birds on the North Sea. We also have radar research, which can also pinpoint birds at sea. All to get information on macro avoidance or micro avoidance. Also information on the flight behavior, factors such as flight height and the number of collisions. And that's all fed into a population model of all the vulnerable species to detect the population consequences of offshore wind farms or plans for a set of offshore wind farms. So with the model, we predict the collisions with a collision risk-based model. And we also have research that we monitor the birds at sea. So once in a while, airplanes are sent to sea, and observers, they just count the birds for different seasons. So it's all valuable information for the population impact and the habitat use of the models for the species. And then I shift to the fish research. So we have research with the effects of electromagnetic fields from the infield and export cables. We also have shark and rays being investigated. We also have a research program with the effects of underwater noise on cod. We also investigate the distribution of soft substrate benthos in offshore wind farms, and we also originally had the plan to also investigate the benthos on the hard substrate, but we don't have access to the assets, so scientific diving is not allowed anymore. So we have to find a different solution for this kind of research. And then I shift to the marine mammals. So again, we do counts at sea, also with airplanes and observers. And we also shift to high definition camera images to be more precise. We started with the frequency weighing of underwater noise for marine mammals. That's also a new topic. So, and all this kind of information is input for the population model. So for offshore wind farms and offshore wind farm future plans, we calculate the population impacts, and we check if it's okay with marine policy, and if there's too much damage for the species, we impose more mitigation. So now something about the indirect effects. Because of all these large offshore wind farms, they influence a little bit the current. So stratification of the water, the layers of the water, sometimes they get mixed because of the offshore wind farms, or maybe the stratification stabilizes. And all these kind of effects with hydrodynamics can have an effect on, for example, primary production, which can have knock-on effects on the top priority predators. I also included a link to a presentation of Deltares. They are doing the hydrodynamic modeling, so that can be also interesting to watch that that presentation. So this is the effect chain. So what you see at the left, you see the wind farms and the currents and the waves. And then in the middle, there are the algae and the seabed. So everything is connected together with arrows. And eventually, there will be also effects on, for example, benthos and plankton and fish, but also birds and sea mammals, and maybe also bats. So this is really a future topic. So we are now just doing the hydrodynamic modeling. We don't have individual based models yet, but we try to catch everything in one model. So something about the urgency of accumulation. Like in short, we are just planning a lot of offshore wind farms. So in 2007, there were only 2 very small offshore wind farms, which are depicted in light blue. And now we are building larger wind farms, and even more from the coast. Even larger offshore wind farms are planned. So there's a lot of work to do for us, but it's also important to assess all these effects in a cumulative way, because normally also internationally research is conducted in a like especially for certain offshore wind farm. So they are doing a monitoring and evaluation program with every time the same topics. But we shifted towards like the National Research Program, ROSEP, and we shifted to do an assessment with all these wind farms together, just to assess the population consequences for all protected species. So what I said earlier, this kind of cumulative impact assessment is based on the WOSEP research, but also other Dutch monitoring research and also international research. These kind of insights, cumulative effect insights, they are also used for strategic environmental assessment. So now we are planning to build offshore wind farms after 2030, and then all these effects are assessed all together, just to have a good grip on what the population consequences are. And so if the populations are declining, if there's a risk of decline, then we can also impose more mitigation just to decrease the population effects. Because it's very important, of course, to balance the sustainable energy with ecology, but also other functions such like fisheries. In blue, in the northern part of the North Sea, you see the wind farms after 2040, so even larger distance from the coast, which is also good to save the birds in the shallow coastal areas. And also fisheries are more intensely distributed in the shallow coast. So that's our approach to get the sustainable goals, sustainable energy goals, but also maintain the conservation goals for species. So I already mentioned, so if there are population consequences which are not according to policy, we can switch the buttons. So before there was unmitigated pile driving, and now we shifted to mitigated pile driving, and we have a level of 168 decibel. We use acoustic deterrent devices, so organisms can flee away. We also have a soft start of the pile driving, so fish and marine mammals, they just get time to move out of the area. Something else, we also have a start-stop mechanism for during mass bird migration. We also have this kind of measures for bat migration, because bats are migrating from the Netherlands and Europe to UK. And in autumn, they move back from the UK over the North Sea to East European countries. And then it's also important to switch off the turbines, because otherwise maybe you get too much casualties. Already said, offshore wind farms are located with a larger distance to the coast, which is beneficial for ecology and also, for example, for fisheries. With the choice of your offshore wind farms, you can also play with your casualties, and you so if gulls are seagulls showing a near decrease, maybe you can choose a different location which is rich with seagulls, just to save more individuals. And if there's the case of not enough ecological space, we can also lower, for example, the underwater noise. So we, in order to decrease the disturbance of sea mammals, so there are less population consequences for these kind of organisms. There's also a tendency of larger windmills, wind turbines. So in 2007, it was 2 and 3 megawatt. They are smaller, also lower, so they have relatively higher bird casualties as a consequence. And because of larger wind turbines, there are less wind turbines needed, so there's also less underwater noise, because you only have to pile drive like maybe 50 wind turbines instead of before 200. And there's also an option for compensation, but until now we don't need that kind of options. But if a certain species declines too much, you can also compensate in different areas. So, for example, with sand turns, you can make beaches with a lot of shell fragments, which is good for the population. So with these kind of compensation measures, you can also boost populations. So some advice for other countries, because we are more or less a bit ahead with our offshore wind farm developments. So we think it's very wise to establish a coordinated national offshore wind farm research monitoring program. And it's also good to combine applied research with scientific research. And it's also good to embed it in a broader national monitoring program. And of course, learn from international and national research. Try to be agile and focus on the fragile. So it's impossible to investigate everything. So you have to make strategic choices just to prevent damage to the protected and vulnerable species. Also move from precautionary approach to a more realistic scenario approach, but still try to be precautionary as possible, as much as possible. And it's also good to establish those response relationships for the protected species and develop framework for ecological population consequences. And it's also very important to check the population sizes and the conservation status of the important species and impose mitigation measures when needed. So that's my presentation, and I want to end with this sentence. So it's very important to balance ecology with sustainable energy and other functions. Everything which I presented yet can be looked up on our website of OSAP, and you can also send me an email. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maarten de Jong. Now we will start the Q&A session with Maarten de Jong and Kees Vlak. So Kees and Maarten, can you join us for this session? Kees, there are already some questions in the chat, yes?
Yes, that is correct, Arjen. I think the first question might be for Maarten. Maarten, what species in the area of the Dutch offshore wind development are classified by the IUCN as critically endangered?
I don't have the full list, I think, active in my mind, but like we are protecting bird species, sea mammals, and bats. So the fish and the bentos, which are my topics, they don't have a protected status, so they are of less concern. But yeah, we try to do our best to prevent all the negative consequences for these groups I mentioned.
Okay, and another question is, how do you define protected species?
Well, the species which are protected, they are assigned from European legislation. So we have the Bird and Habitat Directive. So all these species which are present in the designated areas for wind farms. Well, we have the data, so we know how many animals are in a wind farm area. And then we do the population models, and we just assess what the declines are and if it's in line with the conservation goals, for example.
Okay, and are you aware of any potential impact on species that forced the plans for development of an offshore wind farm to be changed significantly?
So, like over the course of all the wind farms, we just gained every time new insights, new ecological insights. So, if you can remember the three first offshore wind farms, they were depicted in light blue and also shown by Bram du Saar. So these wind farms, they were just like planned by the wind farm operators, but there were many offshore wind farms non-selected. So because of insights around that time, we as a government said no to some areas, and even now in the maps which Bram showed and I showed, sometimes some areas they are just not ultimately selected because of these population consequences, for example. So every time we learn new insights, and then we have to impose new mitigation measures, for example. But also for already existing wind farms, we also sometimes change, for example, the start-stop procedure. So if we know more precise when the beds are at sea, maybe wind farm operators, they don't have to switch off their wind farm that often, and we still can save bed individuals. So we are constantly moving ahead. So we, even with these kind of measures, we try to balance like energy loss and also population decline. So we are just every time we are investigating, and then go back to the table, have a look at the mitigation measure, and maybe make it better.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, then I have a question for Mr. Kees Vlak. Kees, how do wind farm operators feel about other companies operating in their wind farm?
Well, they're not very enthusiastically about that, of course. They have an attitude, this is our site and everybody has to stay out of it. But well, in truth, this is of course not really their site. They have a permit to operate a wind farm there. So there is still, it is up to us to see whether other users are possible, well, without hindering with the wind farm. And if that is possible, we can give out permits for other users as well.
Yes. And related to that, are there many companies looking for a permit to work in these areas? You mentioned the Belgian seaweed company who has very big ambitions, and I saw you a little bit laughing. But can you say something about this?
Well, there is at least one company which is active in seaweed. There's at least one company active in floating solar. There has been made a permit by the Ministry of Agriculture and Fishing for permits to go lobster fishing and things like that. There have been some companies who are interested in that as well. So, but it's really early days. I think with all these things, we have to see what goes well and what doesn't. And I'm sure once there are companies who show that there's good money to be made there will be plenty to join them.
Thanks, Kees.
Yes, I have another question for Maarten. Can you elaborate a little bit on the funding scheme for WOZEP? Where does the funding come from and how much is it?
Okay, so we are funded by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Change. So we started in 2016 until 2021, and now it's extended until 2023. And we already have an extension for the nearby future until 2030. So, and also with the North Sea Agreement, so the Dutch government also freed some budgets for more generic research, and also WOZEP again has a place in the broader part. So the budgets, they are also mentioned in the North Sea Agreement. So you can have a look over there to get a idea of the budget, but I don't know if I can share these kind of numbers. So I'm also looking at Bram in this one. Maybe he can give an answer on it.
I see Bram is already answering in the chat. The program costs roughly 3 million euros per year. So that is a lot of money. Thank you for that, Bram and Maarten. I have also another question for Kees Vlak. Kees, how can ecology projects coexist with activities as food production?
Yeah, that will be a very delicate juggling act, I guess. Well, firstly, we try to keep them apart by doing things on different sides of the wind farms. And secondly, well, we will have to see. We will have to monitor what's going on, and if things don't go well together, we will have to make adjustments in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, then I have a question, maybe to both of you. Maybe you can answer it. But I saw that Kees Vlak also said, well, maybe we have just to leave things alone at the North Sea. Human intervention in nature is always a very delicate issue. Both question to you, Kees and Maarten. How do you see this in general?
Maarten,
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
So we now have plans in the Netherlands to protect 30% of the surface area. So on the one hand, we have a lot of activity, and we have new offshore wind farm plans, and we also want to reserve like 30%. So it's going to be very we have to be very precise with our plans, and we also have to have a good look on like if you have nature conservation goals, maybe you can find a symbiosis between wind farms and ecology, for example, with the nature inclusive building. Maybe we can restore the mussel beds which were originally present in the North Sea. But it's going to be a challenge. But it's like what I said earlier. It was already a challenge, and it maybe the challenge is becoming bigger. But also with the North Sea Agreement, there's now just like a lot of attention to many also generic knowledge gaps. So, for example, the primary production and zooplankton. It's going to be competition between these kind of variables and also food production. So carrying capacity is an important topic, but we don't know everything about it. So we have to give room, space for new activities, but we also have to do monitoring and again look in a cumulative impact assessment way, just to have the whole North Sea in mind.
Thank you.
Well, I'm very interested in seeing what will happen if we do this. We are of course creating very different types of environment nearly close to the shore. So we have no experience with that, and that will create all sorts of new ecological opportunities, I'm sure.
Are you optimistic in this way?
I'm fairly optimistic in this way, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, both for your excellent presentations and addressing these questions. I think we go, Kees, to the next item on the agenda. So our next speaker is Marije Hensen, Senior Environmental and Social Advisor at Atradius, Dutch state business. And the title of her presentation is Biodiversity in Environmental and Social Due Diligence. The presentation of Marije explains what export credit insurance is and how environmental and social due diligence, in short ESDD, for financial products works. In her presentation, quite interesting, Marije will use an example from an offshore wind project in Taiwan. We may start with the video.
Good day, I'm Marije Hensen, Senior Environmental and Social Advisor at Atradius Dutch State Business. Atradius Dutch State Business is the Dutch export credit agency. We insure Dutch exporters for the risk of non-payment by their foreign buyers. And we also insure financiers that give loans to projects that buy Dutch export for the risk of their loan not being repaid. We insure in name of the Dutch state, and more information on our work you can find on our website stated here. There are insurance companies that insure this kind of risk. But when you are not able to insure at a commercial insurance company, you can come to us, the non-marketable risks. And this can be because there are challenging countries, high contract values, or the tenors of repayment are medium to long term, up to 12 years. These are the day-to-day transactions we see. It's ships, dredging project, construction works like bridges and offshore facilities, energy projects in oil, gas, wind power or solar power, medical equipment for hospitals, and capital goods like machinery. For insurance applications, we do a financial review, but we also do an environmental and social due diligence. Why do we do that? Because we think exports should not be associated with bribery and corruption, violation of human rights and international labor standards, or unacceptable environmental and social impacts. We also seek for prevention of reputational risk for the Dutch government, and we promote environmental and social responsible business conduct for the companies we insure. The environmental and social due diligence process, the process works according to international agreements. The most important one is the OECD for us. The process is described in a common approaches, but we also look at the UN guiding principles on business and human rights to prevent human rights violations. And the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises give the rules for the companies we insure, and they have to sign when they look for insurance with us. We also have a national framework, a general one, and one explicitly for the export credit insurance. The content of our environmental and social due diligence report contains a description of the compliance of the project with local laws and regulations and compliance with the international standards. And as a benchmark for that, we use the IFC performance standards from the World Bank Group. And we also use the World Bank Environmental Health and Safety Guidance. You see the 8 IFC performance standards in the picture, and I will take you to the 6th one. IFC Performance Standard 6 handles about biodiversity. We use it in our screening, where we decide on the need of an environmental social due diligence. If there are nature areas or protected species in the neighborhood of the project, we decide for an ESDD. We also use it in the due diligence process, and I will elaborate on that in the rest of the presentation. And if biodiversity issues are at hand at a project, we also will monitor it during the monitoring phase of the project. For the due diligence process, we use the mitigation hierarchy, and that's very important one. We first look if you can avoid impacts. If that's not possible, how to minimize the impacts. If that's not possible, how to restore the impacts. And as a last resource, we can look at the offset. Early engagement is very important because the further you get in this arrow, the higher the costs are, and you have a decrease of stakeholder trust, chance of success, and opportunities to correct or restore. In this slide, you see the arrow again, and the 2 first blocks are preventive measures, and the last 2 blocks are remediative. And the 2 first blocks are the most important: avoidance and minimization, how to prevent negative impacts on biodiversity. And you can do it by site selection. Maybe you can choose another location or change the location, even sometimes a few meters. The design can be very important in minimization of impacts. And the schedule can be important. No construction works during breeding season of birds or migration of whales. This was all very theoretical. I will explain it further in an example. In the recent years, we did an environmental social due diligence on 3 Taiwanese offshore wind power projects, and I will take one of these as an example. At first, in the screening phase, we will decide on what we have in hand. In this case, the Dutch transaction was the transport of the monopiles for a wind power project from Europe to Taiwan with a ship. The project was the offshore wind power project, and the project environment, we had red list species called the Taiwanese white dolphin, but we also looked in items on biodiversity like migratory birds. The environmental and social due diligence report contains a few items. The environmental and social reputation of the involved parties. And that means that we look if the parties involved in the project have a good management capacities for the things they have to do within the project. A description of the project taking into account an overview of the impacts, any mitigation measures, and a general appreciation of the project environment. The impacts of the environment on the project, from the project on the environment. In this project, the process was as follows. We had a cooperation with 15 banks and 3 export credit agencies from different countries. We hired independent consultants, the project did, for environmental and social issues, for technical issues, but also, for example, for legal issues. When we started the monitoring phase, we did a site visit. And here you see a picture on the site visit because construction was had not started yet. Yeah, it's a bit boring picture. But what was very interesting during the site visit was the discussion with the project owner, but also the discussions with stakeholders, like CSOs. Especially a group of CSO that was worried about the Taiwanese white dolphin. We had the interaction with them and they gave us presentation. And in the end, it ended up that their biggest worry was not the wind farm projects that were realized, but the fishermen that used gill nets. And they asked us for cooperation on how to cope with fishermen, because the projects and fishermen were also connected. When we agreed on the project, there were still issues to be addressed. An environmental and social action plan was drafted to deal with them and prescribe what we expected from the project later on. And that was all put down in the term sheet for financing. On the biodiversity side, we made an inventory of protected areas around the project and an inventory of species. In this case, we had marine mammals like the Taiwanese white dolphin, other sea animals. We looked at the migratory birds and especially their routes, if they would interfere with the wind park, and bats. We looked at the impacts, like impacts on habitats and the migratory routes. And we also looked at underwater noise from the wind farm and especially the construction. But also when you put a monopile, you get the soil dispersing in the water. Mitigation measures we also took into account in our report. So the project had marine mammal observers. When a monopile will be built, marine mammal observers will check if there are marine mammals, and if they sight one, they stop the work, wait till the mammals are gone, and then start working again. Screens will prevent the soil from dispersing, and double bubble nets have to contain the underwater noise. And in general, on all projects, but also in this one, biodiversity issues should be addressed at first in the environmental and social impact assessment from the project owner. And mainly that's the impact put for permits. Our ESDD report, our environmental social due diligence. We drafted, as stated before, an environmental and social action plan. And in this case, specifically, we asked for a critical habitat assessment. What is all there? And explicit, detailed description of actions in the biodiversity action plan. And we will also track biodiversity in our monitoring process that's going on at this moment. This was in a nutshell what we do when we perform an environmental and social due diligence. It's very short, so if you have any questions or want to know more about it, you can contact me. Here are my contact details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marije. Well, the last speaker of today is Celine Wang. I'm not mistaken, her Taiwanese name is Wang Peirong. She is a project manager, single service window for wind power. And she has been working in the renewable energy industry already for a very long time. And the last year she has been focusing on ecology policy, implementation, also related to offshore wind. The development of offshore wind power in Taiwan is going rather smoothly. At the same time, the environmental issues, environmental protection is a very crucial issue. There will be many challenges, and Celine will brief us on this. We may start. Celine, of course, you're live, so please go ahead. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Keith, for the introduction. Can you hear me? Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. It's my pleasure to be here. Personally, I want to thank the Netherlands government for holding this webinar wholeheartedly to share the knowledge and experience with us. And in the first session, Deputy Chen had already presented the policy of offshore wind in Taiwan. So my presentation will focus on the challenges we face. I want to seize this opportunity to get answers and learn from so many experts who are gathered for this time. Next page, please. Thank you. Okay, in order to meet the target of energy transition, the development of alternative energy has become a necessary means. We have abundant wind resource in Taiwan Strait, and many concentrated in the north of central area like this red and pink color on the screen. So most of our wind farms are developed here. Next, please. Thank you. And considering the water depth, the first two demonstration wind farms were put in shallow water. Then in the second phase, most wind farms are located offshore of Changhua County. The water depth is under 50 meters. And next, in the third phase, more and more potential developers are targeted at the deep water area with depth of more than 50 meters. As you can see, the development of wind farms are gradually expanding to the deep water area. Next page. Thank you. Apart from rich wind resources, Taiwan has a world-class marine biodiversity, since the country is located in the ecotone of the East China Sea, South China Sea, and the Philippine Sea. Three main currents cause the water temperature to differ by at least 6 to 7 degrees between northern and southern Taiwan. And these make Taiwan abundant for marine life. Next page. Thank you. More than 1/10 of the world's marine species are found here. There are many recorded species of dolphins and whales around Taiwan. That's more than 1/3 of the world's species. And Taiwan is also an important stopover site for migratory birds from the East Asia Australasian flyway, and a significant number of birds migrate through the west of Taiwan. And furthermore, Taiwan has great diversity of marine fish, and so many fishermen rely on them. And next, please. Thank you. The number of fishing vessels in Taiwan is much higher than in Europe. Well, as far as I know, even the North Sea Agreement in the Netherlands has been struggled to negotiate with fishermen, not to mention Taiwan and Japan. And let's see next page. Next. Okay, you can see Japan also has a lot of fishing vessels, and both countries have laws and regulations to protect the exclusive fishing rights in different areas. I think this topic is difficult to solve and needs more negotiation and consideration. The webinar will have more discussion about this topic on day 3. Next. Okay, the following is a series of questions to be answered throughout the development process. If we want to expand the wind farms, the first question we need to know is what's the current status and distribution of marine life. And if we realize the ecological value are really significant, then we cannot avoid this. What's the effect of single wind farm as well as the cumulative effects of several wind farms? And then if we do recognize the specific effects, the next question should be, are there any effective mitigation measures? These 3 questions should have been addressed to the EIA review. We wonder how much money and time we need to answer these questions properly. Is there any shortcut that is more efficient, or for the sake of our desperate need to accelerate the development of offshore wind? Okay, next. While the wind farm starts to construct and operate, we are supposed to address these 2 remaining questions. How effective are these measures? And how can it be improved in a productive way, as well as ways to minimize the effects and reduce the cost and time while the wind farms keep expanding? We know WhatsApp takes a very rigorous step-by-step approach to deal with ecological issues. Personally, I'm glad we can have this opportunity to learn from the Netherlands. And next. Okay, in regard to the first question, Taiwan mainly focused on the endangered species, white dolphins. Only 64 individuals remain. Then the Ocean Conservation Administration has announced the conservation area of the white dolphins habitat in May 2020. However, we still lack understanding of other endangered species waiting for our protection. The EIA review in Taiwan also focuses on the effects of underwater noise, bird collisions, and habitat loss. And in order to get the EIA approval, the developers should make the commitment to minimize the EO effects. And there are some mandatory criteria, such as noise threshold and marine mammal observers. And next page. Thank you. Okay, in Taiwan since 2017, all the EIA approval for offshore wind farms include mandatory threshold values for underwater pile driving sound in the incidental clauses, which is sound exposure level 160 decibel at 750 source distance, which reference to the regulation in Germany. Moreover, developers should make commitments for mitigation strategies and monitoring in the exclusive zone to detect dolphins before piling, and use bubble curtains to reduce the noise. And however, there are still a lot of controversy in the EIA review, such as number 1, how many marine mammal observers is enough? And number 2, should they stay on the central construction vessels or on the fishing boats surrounded by the exclusive zone? And number 3, what kind of foundation makes less noise while driving. And number 4, is single or double bubble curtains sufficient? In Germany, developers should consider the site and the project characteristics to develop the concept of noise mitigation, together with the final pile design 2 years before construction, and implement mitigation measures 3 months prior to start of construction work. Next. Okay. Furthermore, the major concern of NGOs is whether 160 decibel is a safe exposure limit for white dolphins in Taiwan, because this threshold was designed in Germany for harbor purposes. The German government also requires developers to keep monitoring the effects on purposes, followed by standard methods for further evaluation and adjustment. Okay, next. Thank you. On the other hand, issue on birds have also caused some heated controversy recently. According to the EIA commitment, developers use distance between wind farms as 5 corridor for migratory birds. This brings out more questions. For example, the EIA review committee questioned that if the distance between the wind farms is not can it become a death trap for birds? Besides considering to the growing size of wind turbines and the increase in blade length, how much distance should be retained between turbines to reduce the risk of bird strike given the limited space for development? It's really difficult to detect the specific species of birds when they are flying over the sea. So it's hard to estimate the impact and much more difficult to find out the effective strategy to strike a balance between power generation and conservation. As far as we know, no offshore wind farm has conducted the automatic shutdown during mass migration events. And the government of Netherlands is going to create a prediction system that can predict bird migration 48 hours in advance for the implement of the post procedure. Okay, next. Thank you. Okay, the data collected from the ocean is very valuable. It's a demanding task. Researchers have to endure the harsh climate and discomfort on the sea. So it's supposed to rely on the development of state-of-the-art technology. No matter what, following a systematic way to collect the data and store them properly is crucial. Then we can have chance to analyze the relevant data to get positive results. Obviously, there's no shortcut to get a concrete solution. We lack of experience on large-scale offshore projects before, and there are so many things that we should have done and considered comprehensively in advance. But there's no use delving into the past. We should focus more on what we can achieve and overcome all challenges. It may sound like a cliche, but I'm so happy to be here and looking forward to learn from the experts from the Netherlands. My apologies because I don't have any new development to share, only questions, with the hope that my presentation may help engage some discussion and suggestion and answers on the matter throughout the duration of this webinar. Okay, thank you all for listening. I wish you all a wonderful time.
Thank you, Celine, for your wonderful presentation. When I listened to your presentation, I just realized that we are just at the start of this energy transition, both in Taiwan and in the Netherlands, and that we really have a long time still to go. And like you, we still have so many questions that we have to address. We're just at the start. I'd like to ask Marije to join us as well for the Q&A. Maybe, Kees, there are already some questions in the chat, yes?
Yes, sure, there are. The first question is for Celine. In Taiwan, developers have conducted most of the investigations concerning the ecological impacts of offshore wind farms. And there is even no official standard for ecology monitoring programs. And now comes the question, what is the role of the Taiwanese government in understanding and mitigating the possible ecological impacts of offshore wind farms?
Okay, thank
Do
you
you have an answer?
for the question. And I'm apologize. I cannot provide a proper answer for this question because I cannot represent the competent authority. And but according to the Taiwan's EIA regulation, most of the every offshore wind farm should got the EIA approval, which means they need to commit any mitigation measure that can reduce the impact, and then they can get the EIA approval. And of course, they should focus on if the mitigation measure is feasible enough and can be done properly. And so, but right now, I think most developer still on the planning and on the planning stages. So I think maybe next webinar or seminar of this topic can invite the developer to share their findings. Yes.
Okay, thank you. There's another question which is for Marije. Last summer, serious conflicts between developers and fishermen occurred in the Yunling offshore wind farm. Why social due diligence failed to prevent conflicts in advance? Oh, that's a difficult question.
Yeah, with doing environmental and social due diligence, you can't prevent conflicts. You can try to minimize it, and the most important is to get the hierarchy, to get a good design and a good stakeholder engagement in an early stage of the process, and that helps stakeholder engagement in an early stage. Is very important to prevent this kind of things. We see it often, and I must stress this is the main responsibility, of course, of the project owner, not of the parties doing the due diligence, but we do check these kind of things and how project owners organize their stakeholder engagement processes to prevent these kind of things, but you can't never prevent it 100%.
Okay, thank you. Arjen, maybe you have a question.
Let's take a look. Maybe a question to Celine. What are the potential topics that Taiwan and the Netherlands can have further discussion on in the future?
Okay, thank you
Potential,
for the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please take it away.
Okay. As far as I know, the government of Netherlands imposes some regulation for wind farm site decisions according to the advice from a series of ecological programs, such as minimum distance between wind turbines and measures to limit bird collisions. And I think it's important for the competent authority of